In maritime tradition, the pronoun she was reserved exclusively for ships because you'd be hard-pressed to find an actual woman anywhere on board. The fear ran deeper than simple prejudice, rooted in genuine supernatural terror that a woman's presence would enrage the sea gods and summon storms as divine punishment against the entire crew. By the 18th century, the paranoia had metastasized into full-blown witch hunts, with women suspected of controlling winds by tying knots in rope or wielding dark magic to sink vessels from afar. The solution, naturally, was to ban them entirely from the decks. However, while fully clothed, flesh and blood women were forbidden. Wooden figureheads of bare-breasted women were proudly mounted at the bow of countless ships. These same men, who trembled at the thought of a woman in modest dress aboard their vessel, believed that carved naked breasts could shame the sea gods into submission, embarrassing divine forces into calming their wrath and smoothing treacherous waters into glass. Despite the prohibitions, the whispered warnings of ill omens, and the entrenched prejudices of this men-only world, women have always been present on the Great Lakes. They appeared as silent wives accompanying their captain husbands through seasons of brutal storms, as steadfast lighthouse keepers standing watch through winters when temperatures plummeted to 30 below. And today, as commanding captains steering 1,000-foot freighters through some of the most dangerous waters in North America. So, as International Women's Day approaches this March, it seems fitting to illuminate these women of the lakes, the ones history tried to erase, the ones superstition tried to keep ashore, and the ones who showed up anyway and rewrote every rule the maritime world thought was carved in stone. If women couldn't be sailors, perhaps they could be something else entirely. Guardians of the light, keepers of the flame, angels watching over the very men who'd once refused them passage. In the 19th century, lighthouse keeping emerged as one of the few professional occupations society deemed acceptable for women, and the reasoning reveals everything about how that era rationalized women's roles. The work itself, polishing brass fixtures until they gleamed, maintaining meticulous logs, welcoming occasional visitors, and above all, protecting lives, could be neatly tucked into the concept of middle-class domesticity. Safeguarding sailors was simply an extension of women's natural nurturing instincts, or so the logic went. An 1894 article in the Designer magazine captured this sentiment perfectly, declaring that women possessed the most essential quality of any lighthouse keeper: devotion to duty. The economic reality was more practical and far less poetic. Most women became lighthouse keepers after their husbands or fathers, who'd held the position, died. The government found this arrangement convenient. It kept families financially stable and avoided the hassle of relocating them from isolated lighthouse stations. Though women made up less than 3% of lighthouse keepers on the Great Lakes, their dedication became legendary. Take Elizabeth Whitney Williams, who was born on Mackinac Island and called herself a child of the sea. She married Clement Van Riper, and together they managed the Beaver Island Harbor Lighthouse, their lives shaped by the rhythm of waves and the rotation of the lamp. Then came that night in 1872. A vessel foundered in the harbor during a vicious storm, and Clement rowed out into the maelstrom to attempt a rescue. He never came back. Elizabeth later wrote that she was prostrate with grief, barely able to stand under the weight of her loss, but she also understood something crucial. Sailors beyond the harbor still needed that light to survive the storm. So she dried her tears, climbed the tower stairs, and kept the flame burning through 3 more days of tempest. She would continue that work for 44 years across Beaver Island and Little Traverse lighthouses, eventually publishing her memoir, A Child of the Sea, in 1905, preserving not just her own story, but the quiet dedication of countless women who kept the lights. Harriet Colfax took a different path to the lighthouse. At 37, the petite piano teacher traded her sheet music for lamp oil, becoming keeper of the Michigan City Lighthouse in 1861. She would serve for 43 years alongside her companion Anne Hartwell, and those decades were anything but gentle. Before kerosene became standard, lighthouses burned lard oil, which sounds quaint until you understand what that meant in a Great Lakes winter. Harriet had to heat the thick, congealed fat in her kitchen stove, then race with buckets of hot oil across 1,500 feet of narrow pier jutting into Lake Michigan. Sometimes the oil would freeze solid again before she could pour it into the lamp mechanism, forcing her to make the treacherous journey all over again through howling blizzards. Her diary entries from those years are matter-of-fact about near-death experiences, waves breaking over the pierhead, winds strong enough to knock her flat, ice coating every surface until the walkway became a skating rink of potential disaster. One entry, stark in its simplicity, reads, "Heavy sea, waves broke over the top of the tower. I reached there at great risk of my life." She wrote this at age 76, still climbing that tower, still tending that light. She wouldn't retire until she turned 80, her small frame concealing a spine of tempered steel. Then there's Maybelle Mason, whose moment of heroism came when she was just 14 years old. She grew up on Mamajuda Island, where her father kept the lighthouse on the Detroit River in 1890. A steamship's distress whistle cut through the afternoon air. A man had capsized in the river's fierce current and was drowning. Her father wasn't home. Maybelle didn't wait for an adult to appear or for help to arrive from the mainland. She climbed into their small rowboat and fought her way through the current to reach the exhausted man. Despite her size, she managed to haul him aboard and row them both back to safety. The United States government awarded her the Life-Saving Medal, and for years afterward, ship captains passing Mamajuda Island would sound 2 blasts of their whistles in tribute to the girl who'd saved a life before she was old enough to vote. These women didn't just tend lights in cozy towers with romantic views. They endured isolation that could break minds, physical labor that destroyed bodies, and constant danger that claimed lives. They did it for decades at a time, often with little recognition and less pay than their male counterparts. And they did it knowing that every night they failed, sailors died. Not all tragedies on the Great Lakes happened in the middle of storms or out in open water where rescue was impossible. Some happened within arm's reach of safety, close enough to shore that witnesses could hear screams but couldn't prevent the horror unfolding before their eyes. The Eastland disaster of 1915 remains the deadliest shipwreck in Great Lakes history, and it happened tied to a dock in downtown Chicago on what should have been a perfect summer morning. July 24th, 1915, started as a day of celebration for the workers of Western Electric's Hawthorne Works factory. The company's annual picnic to Michigan City was the social event of the year, especially for the young women who spent their days assembling telephones on factory floors. They'd saved their money for new dresses, planned who they'd dance with, giggled about which boys might be on their boat. More than 7,000 tickets had been sold, and 5 steamships were chartered to ferry the workers and their families across Lake Michigan. The Eastland was supposed to carry over 2,500 passengers. When a light drizzle began falling that morning, many of the women and children retreated below decks to stay dry and listen to the band playing popular tunes. What none of them knew was that their ship was fundamentally unstable, a vessel so prone to listing that sailors nicknamed it the bicycle boat because it couldn't stand still without tipping. The bitter irony is that the Eastland had been made more dangerous by safety regulations enacted after the Titanic sank 3 years earlier. The La Follette Seamen's Act mandated that ships carry enough lifeboats and life rafts for every passenger aboard. For the Eastland, that meant adding 11 heavy wooden lifeboats and 37 rafts to the upper decks. The ship had no keel, relying instead on poorly designed ballast tanks to maintain stability, and the enormous weight of all that new safety equipment sitting high above the waterline made the vessel lethally top-heavy. At 7:28 that morning, with passengers still boarding, the Eastland began tilting slowly to port. Within minutes, the tilt became a roll, and the roll became a capsizing. The ship turned over at a 45-degree angle, still tied to the dock, dumping hundreds of people into the Chicago River while trapping hundreds more below decks as water poured through windows and doorways. People on the upper deck were thrown into the water like ants brushed off a table. Those trapped inside drowned in what became an iron coffin barely 20 feet from the wharf. Helena Repa, a Czech-American nurse who worked at Western Electric's factory hospital, was on her way to board the second ship when her trolley suddenly stopped due to traffic. She got off and heard the screaming. A mounted police officer tried to stop her from approaching the scene, but when she identified herself as a nurse, he let her pass. She jumped onto the back of an ambulance racing toward the river and arrived at 7:40. Just 10 minutes after the ship capsized, making her the first medical professional on scene. What Helen did in the next 8 hours should have made her famous. She climbed onto the slippery steel hull of the overturned ship and began triaging victims as rescue workers pulled them from the water. When police surgeon Thomas Carter arrived with strychnine injections, a stimulant used at the time, Helen administered them to victims in a desperate attempt at resuscitation. For those beyond help, she could only shout "gone" before moving to the next person who might still be saved. But Helen did more than treat injuries. She saw survivors shivering from cold water and shock, saw bodies piling up on the dock in a way that hindered rescue efforts, saw chaos that needed organizing, so she took command. She commandeered blankets from Marshall Field Department Store, 500 of them, and had them billed to Western Electric. She ordered hot soup and coffee from nearby restaurants. She stood in the street, stopping passing automobiles, asking drivers to transport survivors to hospitals or homes, and remarkably, not a single driver refused her. When she saw bodies creating obstacles for rescue workers, Helen suggested using the nearby Reed, Murdoch and Company warehouse as a temporary morgue and command center, a recommendation officials immediately accepted. At some point during those frantic hours, she even encountered her own sister Frances, whom she'd feared dead, had a brief moment of relief and kept working. She didn't leave until 4 that afternoon, her white uniform soaked through with blood, mud, and river water, so exhausted she collapsed the moment she reached home. Dr. W.A. Lucas later praised her as deserving of every credit for the enormous volume of work she'd accomplished. Yet Helen Repper never received any medal or official recognition for her heroism, while men who'd done far less were publicly honored. The death toll that day was 844, 70% of them under 25 years old, and most of them women. Among the dead were Caroline Homolka, 17, and her neighbor Anna Quinn, 22. They'd sewn their own summer dresses for the picnic, picked out their nicest shoes, braided each other's hair. Caroline had bragged to the neighborhood butcher that she'd catch the first boat. Her body was later placed on a wicker sofa in her family's home because Chicago had run out of coffins. Her older sister waited for hours at the trolley stop, hoping to see her siblings step off the car, but they never came home. The Eastland remains the worst maritime disaster in Great Lakes history, yet it's often forgotten because its victims were just poor immigrant factory workers and their families, people society didn't think warranted much remembering. The women who kept the lights and those who died in disasters weren't the only ones writing themselves into Great Lakes history. Some women chose to descend into the cold darkness where those tragedies lay waiting, bringing back not just salvaged metal, but the intimate stories of people who'd vanished beneath the waves decades or even centuries earlier. In 1917, with World War I creating a desperate shortage of copper, Margaret Goodman did something almost unthinkable for a woman of her era. She organized a salvage operation to recover copper ore from the Pewabic, the ship that had sunk 52 years earlier after colliding with its sister vessel. Margaret wasn't driven by adventure or academic curiosity. She needed to feed her family while caring for her sick husband and young daughter. And the Pewabic represented a fortune in metal sitting at the bottom of Lake Huron. She hired diver Benjamin Franklin Leavitt, who used a new type of armored diving suit capable of withstanding the crushing pressure at depths up to 300 feet. The Pewabic rested at 180 feet, a depth that had already killed previous divers who didn't understand decompression sickness or lacked adequate equipment. Margaret's operation successfully brought up over 100 tons of copper and iron ore, metal that went directly into the war effort. But what makes her work historically significant isn't the tonnage of metal recovered, it's what else came up from the passenger cabin. Pocket watches frozen at the moment the ship went down, wedding rings still bearing inscriptions, combs that had passed through women's hair on what should have been an ordinary voyage, eyeglasses, gentlemen's boots, fragments of handmade lace so delicate they seemed impossible to have survived half a century underwater. These artifacts transformed the Pewabic from an abstract Civil War-era tragedy into something painfully real. A ship full of people with possessions and plans and futures that ended in an instant. Fast forward to the modern era, and you'll find Valerie Van Heest continuing that work of resurrection, though with very different tools and motivations. A technical diver and co-founder of the Michigan Shipwreck Research Association, Valerie grew up in a diving family. Her father served in the Navy's underwater demolition team during World War II, so perhaps it was inevitable she'd end up exploring underwater worlds herself. But Valerie brought something new to shipwreck exploration, The conviction that these weren't just interesting dive sites or sources of salvageable goods, but time capsules and underwater graves that deserved respect and rigorous documentation. She led expeditions using side-scan sonar to locate historically significant wrecks like the H.C. Akeley, the SS Michigan, and the Hennepin, the world's first self-unloading bulk carrier. One of her most remarkable achievements was finding the lumber schooner Thomas Hume after it had been missing for over a century. The ship had simply vanished in 1891 with all 7 crew members aboard, leaving behind families who never knew what happened. When Valerie's team finally located the wreck in 2006, they found sailors' shoes still sitting where they'd been left, work clothes hanging in quarters, tools scattered across the deck, a snapshot of ordinary life interrupted mid-moment by whatever catastrophe overtook them. Valerie understood that discovering these wrecks was only half the work. As an author and museum exhibit designer, she's written 6 books and produced numerous documentaries translating dry archaeological data into compelling human stories. Her work earned her induction into the Women Divers Hall of Fame in 2006. Recognition for tireless efforts to interpret the buried maritime heritage of the Great Lakes for people who'll never strap on a tank and descend into that frigid darkness themselves. Today's maritime archaeologists use remotely operated vehicles with high-resolution cameras and powerful lights to explore wrecks at depths beyond what human divers can safely reach. Women like Carrie Soden pilot ROVs to document sites like Barge 129 without disturbing the artifacts, treating each wreck as both a historical document and a memorial. Some are even exploring prehistoric sites in Lake Huron, studying the Alpena Amberley Ridge where evidence of caribou hunters from 9,000 years ago lies preserved beneath the water, remnants of a time when lake levels were far lower. The philosophy has shifted dramatically from Margaret Goodman's era of salvage for profit to modern conservation archaeology, where every wreck is treated as a time capsule and underwater grave deserving of reverence rather than exploitation. From being considered bad luck aboard ships to commanding those very vessels, women have rewritten every rule the maritime world once carved in stone. Today, women don't just work on the Great Lakes, they captain ships, command Coast Guard districts, and prove daily that courage has never been a matter of gender. The statistics tell part of the story. Women currently make up only about 2% of the global maritime workforce, concentrated mostly in passenger vessels, ferries, and ships flying flags of convenience. Just a few decades ago, prestigious maritime academies refused to admit women at all. In Britain, they weren't allowed to enroll until the 1980s. The International Maritime Organization now designates May 18th as the Day of the Seafarers' Women in Maritime Theme Day, recognizing women who operate engines, manage shipping companies, and survey vessels. But recognition on paper means little compared to the women actually doing the work. Lily Haynes grew up in Maine, walking the docks with her father among fishing trawlers that reeked of salt and diesel, crewed entirely by weathered men hauling nets. When young Lily announced she wanted to be a deckhand like them, her father shut down the dream immediately. No, that's not a job for girls. It was a response reflecting centuries of entrenched belief that ship decks belonged to male muscle and male authority. Lily didn't listen. She worked her way up through professional sailing, starting as a deckhand in Maine, then pushing into the brutal waters of eastern Canada and even Greenland. While studying at the Great Lakes Maritime Academy at Northwestern Michigan College, she caught the attention of Dave McGinnis, owner of Traverse Tall Ship Company. He offered her a position, and Lily initially balked. "No way am I working on the Great Lakes in fresh water," she insisted. "I'm a saltwater sailor." But McGinnis persisted, and the beauty of the schooner Manitou eventually won her over. The Great Lakes became her home, and she earned her Coast Guard Master 100-ton license, eventually becoming relief captain for both the Manitou and the education vessel Inland Seas. One afternoon, while piloting the Manitou, she overheard a young girl ask her mother, "Is the captain a girl?" The mother responded automatically, "No, honey." When the girl discovered that the person at the helm was indeed Lily, she absolutely lost her mind with excitement. For Lily, that moment crystallized why her work mattered beyond simply sailing a ship. She was living proof that showed young girls their dreams had no ceiling. "Size doesn't matter," she says now. "What matters is the right kind of confidence you have in yourself." Modern maritime work depends less on brute strength than on intelligence, decisiveness, and leadership ability. Her father, who once dismissed her ambitions, now tells people he's incredibly proud of his daughter's professional maritime career. Rebecca Hancock took a different route to the same destination. She grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York, known as the Queen City of the Hudson River, with what she describes as salt water running through her veins. In 2000, she moved to Traverse City to attend the Great Lakes Maritime Academy, accumulating thousands of hours on the lakes and earning her own Coast Guard Master 100-ton license. Before joining the tall ship fleet, Rebecca spent 12 years working aboard freighters, then served on the Clearwater, the sloop made famous by folk legend and environmental activist Pete Seeger in his fight to save the Hudson River. That environmental foundation led her to become first mate aboard the Inland Seas, an education vessel teaching Great Lakes ecology. She quickly learned that working a tall ship demanded far more physical engagement than freighter work. On a freighter, crew members stay protected inside the wheelhouse, but on a tall ship, they face weather and waves directly on an exposed deck. Rebecca's philosophy cuts straight to the heart of what maritime work actually requires. "I look at it as you're a person doing a job. What gender you are doesn't matter," she explains matter-of-factly. Fear visits everyone in this profession eventually, regardless of who they are. What matters is how you react. That's courage, sticking with the task. She also emphasizes how tall ship festivals, like those in Cleveland, help vessels that normally operate as isolated islands connect with each other, sharing knowledge and experience to build a cohesive maritime community. Rear Admiral June Ryan didn't grow up near any ocean. She learned to row on the Mississippi River in Iowa with her father, far from the maritime traditions of the coasts. Her family had military roots. Her father served in the Marine Corps, her brother in the Air Force. But June wanted a path nobody in her family had walked before. In 1982, while a sophomore at Bowling Green State University, she enlisted in the Coast Guard as an ordinary seaman, the lowest enlisted rank. She went through boot camp, earned her way up to boatswain's mate 3rd class, then graduated from Officer Candidate School in 1985. Over the following decades, she commanded the icebreaker Near Bay in Cleveland and the cutter Cape Morgan in Portland, where she personally participated in rescuing hundreds of fishermen from the Pacific. She became the third woman in American history to serve as military aide to the president. Her uniform eventually displayed 8 rows of ribbons, including the Defense Distinguished Service Medal and 3 Legion of Merit Awards. As commander of Coast Guard District 9, she oversees more than 6,000 personnel, protecting 1,500 miles of international shoreline across 8 states and all 5 Great Lakes. Someone once told her to her face that she'd only gotten the position because she was a woman. She acknowledges that being female in a military environment brings challenges, but she's spent her entire career proving that competence has nothing to do with gender. Her husband Tim, a retired Coast Guard officer, and their daughter Aisling have supported her through every promotion, every command, every barrier she's shattered on her way from ordinary seaman to admiral. From silent wives who followed their captain husbands into isolation, to lighthouse keepers who climbed icy towers through blizzards, to archaeologists recovering stories from the deep, to admirals commanding entire fleets, women have always been part of the Great Lakes, even when history tried to write them out of it. The lakes hold more than 6,000 shipwrecks and 30,000 lost souls in their cold embrace. Those stories aren't just about men who went down with their vessels. They're about Caroline Homolka in her summer dress, Helen Repper with blood-soaked hands saving strangers, Elizabeth Williams keeping the light burning through her grief, and every woman who refused to accept that the water wasn't meant for her. If you enjoyed diving into these forgotten stories of the Great Lakes, hit that subscribe button and join us as we continue exploring the mysteries beneath the surface. Thanks for watching.